Hey there berries, welcome to another support guide. Recently we've covered lots of different champions such as Janna, Lulu, Rakan and a bunch of others, so be sure to check out the channel if you're interested in playing other support champions, and if you are interested in support guide content or League of Legends guide content in general, be sure to subscribe, hit the thumbs up on the video, and let's begin. We are going to be doing Senna today. Senna is basically the first proper AD carry support for League. You got a couple of other champions like Ashe and Misfortune, but Senna was built as a support primary in mind. And she's a really good champion, not only if you're coming from the AD carry role and having to play support, because there's a lot of functions there as an AD carry player that you may be familiar with Senna, but it's also pretty good vice versa if you are a support main and wanting to potentially play something into the AD carry role. You could bring Senna into the AD carry role if you wanted to, but it would give you a good baseline in terms of how to play mechanically an AD carry, in general. But Senna's a really fun champion to play. She has quite a high skill ceiling, so she's pretty difficult to play overall. And generally AD carries, to get the most mechanical potential out of them, is generally pretty difficult to play. So if that's something that you're interested in, stick around and I'll walk you through how everything is done on Senna. In these guides, we do these in one take. We cover everything, starting with runes, going into summoners, then talking about the item purchases, and then going into abilities, ability skill orders, and any tips and tricks that you can do on the champion to increase the chances of you winning your game. So on the screen, first we're going to be looking at the runes. We have fleet work. Basically fleet work, all the runes here, if you're a support main, are going to be pretty unique in terms of the fact that you're probably not taking any of these runes on any other support ever. Because Senna is playing like an AD carry, and even the other AD carries, like I mentioned, like Ashe and Misfortune, that are occasionally played in the support role, generally take something like Arcane Comet. So fleet work, I will do a base explanation of some of these runes just in case you're probably not familiar with them if you have only played support. Fleet work, when you're moving around or when you're attacking, you're building up stacks. When it hits 100, you're going to be healing, and also you're going to get a little burst of movement speed. If you are using it on a champion, you're going to get a little bit more healing, but you can use this on minions just to like top up your health a tiny bit. The heal isn't amazing, it's more about the movement speed, and the movement speed is pretty valuable on someone like Senna because she does have slows and roots, so it's really nice to be able to like catch up in some fights or help get out of like little poke trades and things, so it's pretty nice to have. Presence of Mind is basically your mana regeneration. Whenever you're attacking or an enemy champion, whether that's with auto attacks or with abilities, you're going to be generating mana. If you end up getting a takedown, which is a kill or an assist, you're going to be getting 15% of your maximum mana back. So that's pretty nice. In, if you get a random kill in the bot lane, it means you get more mana back to help push in the lane if you needed to. So basically this is the equivalent of having something like Biscuit Delivery, but as a passive that you don't really have to necessarily worry about. Next, we're going to go into Legend Clarity, and that's going to give you attack speed. A lot of Senna's damage in teamfights do come from auto attacks. Senna has some unique kind of attack speed kind of scaling stuff going on, but attack speed is still noticeable in Senna, and it's not necessary to pick up like attack speed items in order to facilitate how Senna works, but some builds do utilize it. The build that we're going to be talking about today will not use attack speed from items, so having the attack speed from the runes from both the Legend of Clarity and on the 10% attack speed stat rune to the right of that is pretty important, otherwise your attacks will feel quite sluggish and slow. Finally, we've got Cut Down. You do more damage to champions with more max health than you. Senna's one of the squishier supports that you can play. There are a couple of goofy builds where you can go like Mega Tank Senna, so you probably wouldn't end up taking something like this. But Senna's base HP in the build that we're going to go for this one is generally lower. On the lower end, like proper AD carry health, and most people will probably have more HP than you. So at least 4 of the other people in the enemy team will probably have more health with you. The exception might end up being something like the enemy support if they're playing like a Yuumi or a Sona. Next, we're going to go into the resolve tree. Bone plating allows you to block burst damage quite effectively. So that's a nice little survive stat in the lane. Also, we're going to take Revitalize. Senna has you got the slight heal from the fleet work that it will affect. Senna has a heal on one of her abilities, and also she has quite a strong shield on her ultimate as well. So Revitalize ends up getting used a fair amount, and it's quite just a nice little extra sustain thing to take. In the stat runes, attack speed always, adaptive force second always, and then obviously changing armor to magic resistance depending on what you're laning against. If you're not sure, just always just take armor, because minions and turrets do physical damage, and it helps you mitigate those because you will be auto attacking a lot in this laning phase. And the way that minions work is when you're auto attacking, you're going to be getting minion aggro. The minions will switch to try and hit you, so this armor is going to help mitigate some of that minion damage. Next, we're going to go into the practice tool, and while we're getting into the practice tool, we are going to be talking about the summoners on Senna. So let's lick in our Senna. And for the summoners, we're going to want Flash, as always, pretty much on every single champion in League of Legends, but we also want Heal. If your AD carry is running Heal already, then I would urge you either Exhaust or Barrier. I know, Barrier, right? There's a summoner that not many supports end up picking up. But Barrier works pretty nicely because Senna is very, very squishy and vulnerable in the lane. Now, the summoning heal is pretty important in terms of keeping yourself alive and giving you that movement speed. So if you don't have that in the lane already, if your AD carry hasn't taken it, then you need to take it. And also it will help your AD carry getting out some sticky situations. If you already have heal on your AD carry, Barrier gives you a lower cooldown. It's lower cooldown than heal, but it's quite selfish. But it does mean that enemy teams might overextend to try and finish you off, and not expect that you're going to be blocking an extra 150 to 200-ish damage, and then overextend based on that, and that can actually lead you into some kills. The exception is that you might want Exhaust against some kind of like champions like Master Yi is probably the most obvious one I can think of. If there's a Master Yi on the enemy team, you're going to want to reduce his damage. It's quite difficult to actually crowd control something like a Master Yi, so you're going to want to actually just mitigate the amount of damage he's doing full stop to your team, as opposed to trying to like shield one auto attack essentially. But generally it's either heal or barrier that I'm going to want you to focus on. So next we're going to be focusing on items. Now items as Senna, once again we're entering into tricky territory, because none of the other supports buy the same items as Senna, with maybe a minor exception to Pike. So very, very kind of unique item pool here, because she is a very, very unique support. Now there are two builds that are currently popular right now when playing Senna. You've got Lethality, which is Lethality as a stat is generally better if the enemy team does not have armor resistance. So the lower armor that the opponent has, Lethality is worth more. And then there's a crit build where it involves kind of Kraken Slayer and maybe like Navori's Quick Blade or an Infinity Edge. We're not going to be doing that build. That build, I will go into the theory why that is not necessarily as good as the Lethality build at the end, and I'm going to do Microsoft Paint graphs to kind of explain why that is the case. So timestamps, as always, will be for everything at the bottom. If you're interested in that explanation and you just want to skip to it now, then use that timestamp. Otherwise, stick around. We've got a lot of things to talk about. So, on Senna, you're going to want to take the Spectral Sickle. This is basically the AD version of Spell Thieves. So everything that you're used to with Spell Thieves in terms of harassing to generate gold, exactly the same with Spectral Sickle. It's just that it's got attack damage instead of ability power. Also, I need to give myself some gold so I can buy some more items. Okay, so we're going to be focusing on the lethality section. Before you dive into too much lethality, I want you to make sure you get the boots of swiftness as quickly as possible. Say, for example, you're on like 650 gold, you can go boots and then start going into Umbral Glaive, this lethality item. This is going to be the first potential item that you're going to be picking up when playing Senna. So, getting boots of swiftness relatively quickly, maybe picking up a long sword or two just to kind of spend the extra gold when you're getting back into Fountain after a recall or two. But boots of swiftness is absolutely priority. It's going to give you enough movement speed to be able to reposition in fights quite nicely. You don't really benefit a huge amount from Berserker Greaves, as kind of mentioned in the rune section. Attack speed isn't vital on Senna. It is a nice little thing, but it's not as important as some other AD carries, like in the actual AD carry role, such as like Vayne and Cogmore. So boosts of swiftness, gives you a ton of movement speed and reduces the strength of slowing effects on you by 25%. Usually in the bot lane there are some kind of slows as well, so that's quite nice to be able to mitigate some of those a little bit. Next we're going to be going into Umbral Glaive. Now Umbral Glaive is a lethality item and has a very unique component in terms of able to give you more vision on the map, or preventing enemy vision on the map is probably the better way to put it. It's extremely cheap at 2.3k gold, has a nice bunch of stats, but the most unique thing about it is this blackout. If I can try and bring it up on screen here. So when spotted by an enemy ward, reveals traps and disables wards around you for 8 seconds on a 50-second cooldown. Your attacks do, because we're ranged, 2 damage to wards. So in 2 hits you will be able to kill control wards and stealth wards. So usually control wards, you know, have a bit more HP and require more auto attacks. Senna can kill them in half the time. Stealth wards you can kill in 2 hits as opposed to 3 hits. Your Q, which I'll go into more in depth in the ability section, will actually damage wards as well if you're using that as your primary target. So you can actually do a quick auto Q combo to kill wards extremely quickly, which is why Umbral Glaive is very, very good on Senna. As you're playing through the game, you're going to be having like the stealth ward, and then once you've upgraded your spectral sickle to halfway, you're going to have access to wards, so you don't need the stealth ward trinket. You'll have access to the Oracle Lens. Now the Oracle Lens and the combination of Umbral Glaive allows you to clean out a lot of wards on the map a lot of the time. So you know, you're going to be sweeping at first with the oracles, checking out for wards. Oracles has around about a 2-minute cooldown. You're going to be spotting wards, you're going to be killing wards in 2 hits. And then whenever you're near a ward that you can't see, say for example there was a ward in this brush and I was about to approach it before I even go in, a little pink eye ball will be above my head to indicate that there's a ward nearby, and it will reveal any wards and any traps that are nearby. And then once again you're going to be able to one-shot those as if like you or 2-hit those, and works pretty much the similar way to oracles, but doesn't have that kind of like red swirling graphic. So with those two the trinket and the Umbral Glaive blackout, alternating between them when you're roaming across the map is going to give you a huge amount of map presence and make it really difficult, especially when you're ahead, for the enemy to gain map control. That's why Umbral Glaive is particularly good. Next, we're going to go into our mythic. So we didn't go mythic first item, we're going mythic second so we can have that map presence. We're going to go into Eclipse. Now Eclipse is a much more expensive item, but luckily, you know, going from Umbral Glaive isn't too expensive. So in a standard game of League, you should just be able to buy this build. It sounds kind of funny, but these are the 2 items here that you're probably going to be running and having for the majority of your Senna games, and there's a good chance you might end up stopping after Eclipse and Umbral Glaive just because the game might be over. If the game is still continuing, you have a couple of options. If you feel like your team's about to go for a very key objective like Baron Nashor or a very vital dragon and you need a power spike urgently, I would highly recommend still going into the Watchful Ward Zone. I talk about this in my support guides all the time. Very, very good item. I'll do a brief overview for you now. When you have completed the support quest and you have reached level 13, if you have Watchful Wardstone in your inventory, you can buy it afterwards. If you are already level 13, it will auto convert into Vigilant Wardstone. So if you've already got Watchful Wardstone in your inventory and you're level 12 and then suddenly you hit level 13, it will automatically upgrade straight away. You don't need to go back to the fountain. Or if you're already like level 13, level 14 or whatever, and decide to pick up this item later, you buy the Watchful Wardstone and then it will just auto convert into your bag. Now the great thing about Vigilant Wardstone is that it's super cheap at 1.1k gold. It counts as a legendary item, which goes towards your Eclipse passive, which grants other legendary items 4% armor penetration and 5 movement speed. So you're going to get a bit of extra movement speed with that and armor penetration. And also it's going to give you a 12% stat boost to ability power, ability haste, attack damage, and health. And then of course you've got the extra base stats there of 15 haste and 150. Also, all control wards get put into this item, even in the Watchful Wardstone base. You can see there's a level 3 in the 3 indicator on the bottom right hand corner of that item to indicate that there's 3 control wards. And also when that item completes into Vigilant Wardstone, you're going to have access to putting down another stealth ward and another control ward on the map, totaling up to the wards that you can have on the map at one time from 4 to 6, which gives you even more map control. Now, if you are feeling like you're going to be in the damaging mood, then I would recommend that you go into something like a rapid fire cannon. There's a passive ability that we're going to be talking about shortly that increases Senna's auto attack range, and rapid fire cannon makes it so that you can do one little bit of cheeky poke damage on a squishy target from an extremely safe distance, and usually that auto attack ends up doing quite a bit of damage. We're talking about 25 to 30% of the target's HP if they're a squishy like mid laner or a support. So it's really valuable just to take just some cheeky damage, honestly, and you might be able to get another combo in with an ability that I'll talk about later on. Huge damage potential there, and if you do go the rapid fire cannon, you're definitely then ending up with a wardstone, because at this point there's a lot of money here invested into the actual build. Now, talking about the Mythic, the Eclipse is more beneficial if you're melee. Obviously, Senna is ranged. So the Mythic passive, we talked about that a tiny bit earlier, is going to give you more armor penetration for every single legendary item that you have, and more movement speed, which is fantastic stats for Senna. Also, if you hit a champion with 2 separate attacks or abilities, which you will be doing constantly on Senna, you're going to be doing an additional 3% max health as physical damage and grants you more movement speed. And then also you will receive a shield. So this works a little bit in combination with fleet work, if you remember from the rune section, how you're going to get movement speed from using your energize proc. Once you hit use 2 separate attacks or abilities on an enemy, you're also going to get like a burst of movement speed. You got the burst of movement speed also from the boots of swiftness. So there's a lot of different like movement speed abilities on Senna, which makes it really, really nice in terms of being able to reposition, chase, and try and getting away from certain situations as well. That's basically the ability section covered. As at the end, I did say that I would cover the crit build, which does go into a Kraken Slayer, and then it's like a Navori Quickblade slash Infinity Edge. I'm going to explain why I wouldn't recommend that at the moment, even though it is a very good build. I'll explain that at the very end. Instead of going the rapid fire cannon, you do have one loose option. I mean, basically the Umbral Glaive and the Eclipse and the order that you buy these items are mandatory. The same with the boots of swiftness. If you are finding yourself up against a lot of tanks and they have healing, I would highly recommend Mortal Reminder. Senna's fantastic at applying grievous wounds. If you just want raw damage and the enemy team doesn't have a huge amount of healing on them, then Lord Dominic's Regard is also a fantastic item against tanks. So if you are up against a lot of tanks and they are stacking a lot of armor, you will need to pick up either the Mortal Reminder or the Lord Dominic's. Both of these items build off of the Last Whisper, so you're going to be prioritizing buying the Last Whisper first and then diving into one of these other 2 items. If the enemy has a lot of healing, you might be wanting to go more into the Executioner's Calling first, and having like an item build layout, something similar to what I have in my inventory right now, in order to reduce the amount of healing done by the enemy team. But for standard purposes, we're going to take the rapid fire cannon, as this is like the most optimal build for Senna. Right, next we are going to be talking about the ability section, and there's a few things and complicated mechanics potentially to talk about on Senna, which I'm going to do my best to try and explain. First, we need to load in a target dummy, and these target dummies are treated as champions. So first we have a mini game with Senna on her passive. Senna can attack souls that spawn from dead enemies to absorb their mist. She can also siphon mist from enemy champions she hits with attacks or abilities twice, dealing an additional percent of current health physical damage. Okay, so let's just talk about that first. So if you hit an enemy champion twice, so it could be with 2 autos, it could be an auto attack and an ability, or it could be 2 abilities, you will proc this absolution debuff, which will mean that you will get 1 soul from an enemy. So I'll showcase this here. Auto attack, and then you kind of have this kind of soul debuff animation going off them, and then your second auto attack will drain it off. Do note there is a set amount of time in order for you to land that second auto attack, but it is quite generous. So if I auto attack this champion now, it's about 3 to 4 seconds. You have that window of landing another damaging ability or attack in order to receive that soul. There is a cooldown attributed to that. It goes from 6 seconds to 4 seconds. So in the later stages of the game, you can proc this more often. When you do this soul suck animation, you are also going to be doing maximum current health physical damage to the target, and that also scales with your current level. Now the whole mini game of this is collecting souls from enemy champions and from minions. Now the reason why Senna is primarily played in the support role rather than the AD carry role is because of this soul function, because souls can also drop from minions and monsters. And if Senna last hits the minions, the drop rate of the souls is greatly reduced. So for example, if a cannon minion dies near Senna, and Senna isn't the one to kill the cannon minion will always drop 1 soul. It's the same with also the melee minions and the caster minions, but it's not a guaranteed drop, it's a random drop around about 10%. Honestly, they change the percentage drop rate a lot, but all you need to know is as long as you're not last hitting the minions, you're gonna have a massively increased chance of receiving the souls. If you do last hit a minion, there is still a chance that you can get a soul, but it's just greatly reduced, hence why she's played more in the support role as opposed to the AD carry role. Also, when you're picking up these souls, you're also going to receive a minute amount of gold, but the gold adds up to a fair amount. It means that you're going to be able to buy a couple of extra controllers. I think at the moment it's around 8 gold per soul that you're picking up from the ground. So it's worth picking them up for the extra stuff that I'm going to go into in a second. But the extra cash is definitely more than welcome, especially when you're going into a slightly more expensive build than maybe some other supports, like going into like an Eclipse. Also, jungle creeps can also drop souls. I feel like I should mention this while we're talking about the ability section, because I feel like some people could miss this. The same thing kind of happens. You can actually last hit jungle creeps in order to get the guaranteed soul drop. So this large Krug, for example, here I better actually show you the soul. So you see how that soul drops off? For some reason, when Senna kills the large monster, there will always drop a soul. It's the same if the jungle kills it as well. It seems to be the exception to the rule of her killing. But the other mobs around it will have a greatly reduced chance of dropping a soul if Senna is the one killing them. So in some cases, you are kind of like following around your jungle a little bit if you've got nothing else to do to come and pick up the souls. Like red buff and blue buff will always guarantee drop a soul. The large chicken, for example, will always drop a soul. And if the jungler kills the little raptors, there's a good chance that you can pick up an extra like 1 to 3 souls just by like hovering around. But you need to be in a the distance is quite generous. Like you can be standing roughly around about here and you'll be eligible for the actual drops for soul potential. But just be kind of near the targets in order to be able to like then have the chance of them even dropping in the first place. Also Dragon, Baron and Herald will also drop souls for you as well. So let's go back into the base. We have still not finished talking about the passive. Every time you pick up a soul, you're going to be receiving attack damage. So it's vital that you pick up as many souls as you can throughout the game within reason. There are some cases in lane where it's going to be tricky to pick up a soul because you're going to put yourself in an exposed position. There is a way that you can pick up souls with your Q ability, which we'll talk about soon. But you want to pick up as many souls as you can. And at every 20 stacks is a significant buff to Senna. So at every 20 stacks, you're going to get attack range and 10% critical strike chance. If you are on 100% crit strike chance already, including from items and the souls you have already gained, 35% of excess critical strike chance is converted into lifesteal. So generally, you won't really be getting a massive amount of extra stat conversion into crit chance into lifesteal. It's a nice little thing that it means that if you overcap on crit chance, it's not the end of the world, but the actual conversion from crit chance into lifesteal is pretty poor and not really something that you should be investing into. Like, you shouldn't be picking up like crit just to like overcap and then getting that to that lifesteal conversion. It's generally not worth it. It's just like an little extra thing if you manage to obtain an absurd amount of souls in a game. Also, Senna's attacks take extra time to fire, deals an additional bunch of physical damage, and briefly grants her 10% of the target's movement speed. So another movement speed thing amplified into the passive with the fleet work, with the eclipse, with the movement speed boots. You can see how much movement speed Senna can actually pick up in an actual fight. Is pretty insane. So the main thing here to take note of is that every 20 stacks you're getting basically 10% crit chance, but the big one is attack range. It does end up meaning that Senna's attack range gets massive, absolutely massive, especially once you start hitting like the 100 soul marks, which is totally possible to do in a game. In really long games, I've managed to hit once or twice around about the 180 soul mark. And then, you know, bear in mind, every single individual soul you're picking up as well is increasing your attack damage as well. So you're getting more range, more attack damage, more crit chance, and then potentially lifesteal on top of that because of your over 100% crit conversion. That's just the passive. Next, I need some levels. And we're going to be talking about our Q. So our Q ability has kind of two hitboxes in one. It is a damaging and a healing ability. So Senna shoots a bolt of piercing shadow through an ally or enemy, dealing damage to enemies and slowing them. Restores health to allied champions. Auto attacks reduces abilities cooldown by 1 second. Okay, there's a few things to take in note here. The cool thing of this ability is that the healing portion is affected by lethality. So if you have lethality and attack damage, it means that your health on the actual heal on an allied champion is increased. Also, when you use this ability, the heal will also affect yourself automatically. So if you are low on health and you want to just heal, it is much better to do it on an allied champion rather than on anything else, because you will still be healing yourself and you'll be healing your teammate as well at the same time. Now you can have both of this in combination at the same time. So the other component to this is a damaging effect, so that's going to slow the target, it's going to damage the target. It's also going to be one of those instances of attack for the soul sucking. So if you do an auto attack Q, you're going to be grabbing a soul. But also, one big thing to take note of is that this is an auto attack reset. So it's going to reset that auto attack animation, and then why, and there's the reason why Senna doesn't necessarily need attack speed, because she does have that auto attack reset. So you can do auto Q auto to get a huge kind of like big power spike off of damage. But you can both basically use this to, if you are able to position yourself properly in order to do this, you can do a heal and a damage at the same time. So there, we targeted our Q onto our ally, but we're also damaging the enemy champion at the back. In the advanced section, I will be explaining how to utilize this in many different functions in order to fully capitalize at the usage of the Q. And the Q skill cap is very high, and you can even use this on things like wards and minions. So yeah. Senna's second ability is her W, which is a bit more basic to understand. If you've played anything like Lux or Morgana, it's going to be a little bit similar. So Senna sends forth the black mist, dealing physical damage to the first enemy hit. After a 1 second delay, the target and other nearby enemies are rooted for 1 second. So you have full control of this ability, unlike the Q. So the Q, you have to have a target in order to use the ability, whether it's a ward, champion, minion, turret structure. The W is free flowing. You can actually aim this wherever you like. It will connect to the first target hit, similar to like a Morgana binding. Then after a brief delay, it will root anyone inside this circle. Do note, if you kill the target with that W, the delay will not exist, and it will immediately root anything inside that circle, which I'll go more into the advanced section. There's some very rare uses and gimmicky things you can kind of do that with. But it's good for me to tell you that if you do hit like a minion on really low HP and there's an enemy champion nearby, they will also get rooted by that straight away instead of that 1 second delay buffer. Senna's E. Curse of the Black Mist. Senna dissolves into a cloud of black mist for 6 seconds, becoming a wraith. Allied champions who enter the mist are camouflaged and become wraiths when they leave. Wraiths gain movement speed, are unselectable, and hide their identities as long as no enemy champions are nearby. So this is basically Senna's primary escape ability. You'll probably be using this ability 80% of the time to escape, maybe higher, 90%. It's going to give you movement speed. When you walk over an allied champion, it's going to make them kind of turning all stealthy and misty, but the enemy team will see them as a generic kind of black spectre. Any champions hiding inside this circle, the enemy champions won't be able to see the positioning of this target unless they have like we're on the turret, or if there's an enemy champion close enough to the target. So in this kind of situation here, this enemy champion cannot see the positioning of this target dummy. Now this is quite a difficult ability to use for your teammates use this aggressively, because say for example that this is an engaged champion behind me. Say we're hiding a Malphite and he wants to rush in and use his ultimate to knock up players. He could actually hide onto anywhere in a circle, so he could actually go in front of me, and the enemy champions won't know who is inside this circle, where they are, if it's just me, if it's my whole team. So there's quite a bit of an unknown and respect factor of this. Also, everyone inside the circle, my team, is going to get movement speed. And if they leave the circle, the enemy team is still not going to know who the hell that person is unless they use an ability. So it makes it very difficult for the team to know who it is, because they could think it could be a squishy AD carry, or it could be the complete opposite. So not knowing what that person is a huge factor in some of these fights. So you can imagine using this as an engage tool to get your team in. Maybe you've tricked them earlier into the laning phase, like thinking, okay, maybe there's a gank happening, and playing mind games, but it's only just you. But then 10 seconds later into the 10 minutes later into the game, you know, in the mid game, they think, oh, it's just Senna playing tricks again, but then you got like 2 or 3 teammates inside there, and then you're just engaging off of that. So you can play some real mind games with that. Fun note, little tab I just will add, is that Rengar, there was a change in him last year where he can basically use his leap from this as well, so he can actually engage from Senna's E. And Rengar on your team as a jungler is going to be a really powerful combination with Senna, because it means he can basically jump out of your E as if like you were a brush. But the defensive tools in this, you can use this, you know, to try and get away out of certain situations, because it's going to give yourself and your AD carry and whatever on your team extra movement speed to get out. So that's the nice thing. And then you've got the whole untargetable thing as well, where they just won't be able to click on you either. So even if they're kind of in this rave state, because if they are leave the mist, they are unselectable, which means that they can't actually do point and click things on the targets. They can still kind of use, like, you know, projectiles to kind of fire out at the Wraith, and it will still connect. But right clicking to auto attack the target, they are unable to do. So it's really good against team compositions that have a lot of auto attacks as well. Now finally getting into the ultimate. The ultimate is a global, and also has a 2-part hitbox similar to your Q, but in Giga Chad form kind of graphic. So this does affect the whole map. Even if like you do it from here, it doesn't look like it's going to do it from the whole map, but it will cover, you know, everything in that line. So that just affected the entirety of bot lane, even though, so we're doing it from here, but also say for example, if I just do it, like click it right in front of me here like this, that is still going to travel to the entirety of bot lane. Now if you hit anyone in that middle cylinder, that will damage them. Anything else in the kind of, so that will damage enemy champions in the middle kind of section. The outer sections, including the middle section, if an allied champion is anywhere in this kind of section, they will get healed, not healed, sorry, shielded. They will get shielded. So you can hit it on like on the wing here as well, and they'll get shielded. And then the center bit, as mentioned before, will actually damage enemy champions. Whew. Okay, that is probably the easiest ability to actually talk about, because it's got the smallest tooltip, which is the ultimate, which is kind of funny. When we talked about the passive, we talked about how Senna got extra stuff, like attack damage from picking up souls. Every 20 souls equals more range, equals more crit chance, and potentially more lifesteal. What I didn't mention, because I didn't talk about the other abilities, is that souls also affect, in a way, pretty much every ability, but it does directly affect the amount of shield happening from your ultimate. So 150% of the shields that you have, souls that you have, 150% of the souls you have go into your shield. So the more souls that you have, the better the shield is for your team. But also the souls are impacting your Q, your W as well, and also your ulti in terms of damage, because picking up souls equals more damage, attack damage. So in a loose way, it does pretty much affect every single ability apart from your E, because your E does not do damage. Whew, I hope you're keeping up. In the advanced section, if that didn't feel like advanced enough, I will be covering some little tips and things that you can do for abilities that you wouldn't be aware of if you just stopped there. So if you have maybe already done a game or two on Senna, going into the advanced section will help maybe clarify some things that may be happening in your games that you've realized. But I'm saving it for the advanced section because I feel like that is already a lot to take in. And I feel like you can run with what you have there already. Going into the skill order, you're going to be maxing your Q. It's going to be your main harass tool throughout the entirety of the game. Then you're going to be maxing your W. The good thing about maxing the W second is it also increases the root duration from 1 second to 2 seconds, and when that's an AoE potential root as well, that could be a lot of actual root time done in a team fight. Also the damage goes up, which is quite nice. It's like it's not a huge amount, but the main thing is the root duration. And then finally your E. The only real thing is that it does slightly increase the duration of the stealth and just reduce the cooldown a little bit dramatically, but overall, because the utility on the root on the W is just much more beneficial for the actual fights, you don't necessarily need the stealth to like last even longer. And then obviously taking your ultimate whenever you can at 6, 11 and 16. Right, let's talk about advanced tips including laning phase and throughout the game, because both of those are kind of intertwined in terms of how complicated things can potentially get for your first couple of games on Senna. But I promise once you've done a couple of games, all of these fundamental kind of things will click into your head and then it will be fine. I promise, but it will take a game or two. So for this, we are now going to go into the bot lane. And we're going to teleport down there and bring us a couple of champions to play around with.
That monster wants to hear me scream.
So a lot of the laning phase is generally being aggressive while doing trades in order, at least 2 hits on enemy champions in order to generate that 1 soul. And the process of doing that is largely auto attack Q. So it's going to be, you're going to be wanting to do auto attack, Q, and then run away. There's just a few things. So that's going to give you movement speed. It's going to obviously damage the enemy. It's going to get you a soul. It's going to slow down the enemy because the Q slows, so it's going to be difficult for them to trade back. If they do trade back, don't forget that your Q is also going to heal you as well. So if you're on like 90% HP here and you're doing this trade, you're going to be back up to 100. If they land an ability on you, you're going to go back down to around about 90%. So effectively, you're not really losing anything for this trade for yourself, but you're getting stuff done. Not in terms of like harassment, yes, but also you are progressing up your soul count. It is extremely important that you try and keep up with these souls, particularly in the early game, mainly because it is a ramping effect. The more souls you have, the more damage you have, but it's basically a multiplied effect because your range increases. Every 20 souls that you get will make the next 20 souls easier to get. It's just as simple as that. Just because you have more attack range means you can attack from very, very high ranges in order to proc them, and basically some trades just become straight up free because you have way more range than the enemy champions. So going into the mid game when you have like 100, 120 souls, it's extremely easy to harass enemy champions and get a soul for free, and that just makes it easier and easier and easier and easier to get more and more souls. Now, because you're playing bot lane, you've got 2 champions here that you can harass. So, but don't get over kind of cocky necessarily in terms of going for too much, because your Q will have a cooldown. And also when you're attacking enemy champions in lane, you're going to be pulling minion aggro. So you're going to need to utilize the brushes as much as possible, because as soon as you go stealth, you can always use your E to use this, but that also costs mana. So you could be like auto Q, making sure you go back into the brush. So you're doing the trade outside of the brush. Minions are then going to be drawn onto you, and also the enemy champion's also going to want to hit you as well. You're going into the brush to make sure that the minion aggro resets, so they attack minions instead. The brush also then makes it so that the enemy champion can't see you, and then you're like moving away and then repositioning. If you're able to hit both enemy champions, that's going to be awesome in terms of like, you know, Q auto, and then you're hitting the other champion. But do remember that there is a 6-second cooldown anyway from landing it on one particular person. So for example, you know, AD carry and support, you can hit this target, get 1 soul, then quickly hit the other target, 1 soul. But this initial target will still be on cooldown before you can then get another soul. Early on in the laning phase, it's going to be 6 seconds. So that's like the basic trading that you're going to be doing in lane. Now we have another element here that we're going to talk about, and we briefly talked about when we talked about the Q. It's healing your ally while also being able to harass. And now this is where it becomes quite tricky, because the maximum value you can get from your Q is getting the heal on yourself, your AD carry, and then also using that damage to overlay onto the enemy. If you're able to do this trade in lane, it's going to be super powerful, and if you're able to do it consistently, then it's going to be super amazing. So the trick is that you try and Q your AD carry, so they get the guaranteed heal. You're also going to get healed from using the Q anyway. And then you're trying to like poke one of them down, and then if you're able to, try and get in for an auto attack range to yoink that one soul off of them. Another thing as well is that both your Q and your ultimate also pick up souls, and it's not obvious that that's the case at all when reading the tooltip. But your Q can actually pick up souls. I'll try and showcase this over here. Let's go back to the Krug, because I know that drops a soul. So you see that there's that soul on the ground. If I Q this ward, you can see how I picked up that. There's another soul that spawned, so let's Q that. So you can use your Q to pick up the souls, rather than traditionally right-clicking to pick them up. So normally you'd be right-clicking the souls to pick them up as like your mini game, and then you're getting 8 gold. But you can use your Q to do that, and also your ultimate does that as well. You would not be using your ultimate to pick up souls intentionally, trust me. But your Q is something that you might have to do if you're struggling like behind turret, or if the minions are like in a really bad position and you're not in range to actually Q. You could end up like having to Q a minion or a ward or an allied champion in order to help pick up those souls from that kind of extreme distance that you wouldn't be able to otherwise actually get. So that's a huge tip in lane to help get you those few precious souls early on in the game in order to scale up later onto the game, because every single soul that you pick up as early as possible, safely mind you, will add up massively throughout the course of the game. One soul in that first 20 soul bracket that you're getting will probably end up equivalent to about 5 souls later on. That's how important it is that you get as many souls as possible early on.
It's harder to hold a hand than hold
When we
a gun.
talked about the W, I did mention, if you did skip it, that if you kill a minion, so let's go over to the KFC camp, also known as the chickens. Say this chicken here, it's going to be quite difficult to hit, but we will W this chicken, and you can see how everything instantly got rooted around it. Don't be mistaken though, like it does feel like with the first couple of times you play Senna that AoE root should do damage, but it doesn't. It's just a root. So there are some situations, like you can imagine if a minion is low HP in between these two champions and you weave in that W, it will instantly root them both and can be really good for gank setup. I will say though that this is incredibly hard to do in practice. Especially because if an enemy player sees your W coming across, they're already going to be like moving away from it anyway, from where the location is. So it's not likely to necessarily land anyway, but it is just like valuable information to know, because there could be a random situation in that 1 in 100 games where that could become valuable. When you hit 6, you're going to be doing something a little bit similar to Soraka. You're going to have to start paying attention to what's happening onto the other sides of the map a lot more in terms of actual health bars as well, considering that because you can use this ultimate globally. So you're kind of like a mini Karthus and a mini Soraka in one, and that you can change the outcome of fights on literally the opposite side of the map. You can see that there is a slight delay. The further that you're aiming is the longer the delay, but it's nothing like an Ezra ulti or a Jinx ult. It's one of the fastest projectile global ults that are in the game. So you can see on the minimap, if you do look, it does travel but extremely quickly, but it's not instant. So you do have to do a slight prediction where the enemy is going to be walking to in the next second or so. Another advanced tip, your abilities can go through wind wall. Okay, so Senna's auto attacks are actually classified as a laser instead of a projectile, and lasers go through wind walls. So that includes Yasuo's wind wall and Samira's kind of like her circle wind wall. So you can actually still damage those champions. So she's a really good kind of counter pick to like those kind of champions that thinking that they're safe behind their wind walls. Your Q also works through the wind wall, but your ultimate and your W do not work through wind wall. In fact, if Yasuo has a wind wall up, it will make sure that your shield basically does not progress further than the wind wall, so that can actually block your global, and something you might have to pay attention into an actual game. But your auto attacks and your Q will go through Yasuo's wind wall and Samira's wind wall. As mentioned on the ability section on your E, Rengar can leap out of your E as if he was in a brush. That's some valuable information that you might want to know if you're playing with a Rengar. Just trying to think if there's any other tips. I mean, as showcased earlier, you can use... I use this probably quite often in a game of playing Senna. I'd say I probably use it about 1 in every 2 games. Is at some point you might want to do a ward Q hit. Now this is where it becomes quite difficult to do. You need to kind of just prep for it and practice it in a practice tool. But it becomes fairly easy once you're kind of used to it. And there are some cases where, say for example here, I can't reach this target dummy until I get a lot closer. But say if they're really low HP, or if they're like getting close to dying, say they're on 25% HP, that allows me to attack this target at much further range, and then don't forget my Q slows them. So that's going to allow me to catch up to hopefully land that second ability or auto attack, so I could get my W potentially in range here as well to keep following up that pursuit. But doing ward into Q is a thing that you will need to practice on Senna. It is an absolute must at some point after you've done at least a couple of games, because you will be utilizing this a lot in terms of chasing down, getting poke, maybe picking up some cheeky souls. There's a lot of different things that you can utilize your Q for, and you need to be able to do this ward kind of skill shot fairly often. Like there, you know, missing like that will happen a fair amount in your games, but you kind of want to get used to having these kind of abilities on Smartcast, which means activating like these little curved arrows on your abilities to get this done as quickly as possible without having to rely on, you know, analyzing the actual hitbox and working if it's gonna hit or not. You just need to just fire them out as quickly as possible. As kind of mentioned a tiny bit in the ability section, but I didn't actually go through it. Your Q has 2 hitboxes, quite similar to your ultimate. That middle bit is damage, and the outer bit is a heal. So if I can try and position myself, so that might hit that still. It's quite difficult. Okay, so here. So even though that hitbox is landing on that target dummy on the left, I promise that it is. If it was an allied target dummy, it would heal them. Actually, in fact, I can probably put an allied one to prove that that would hit. Oh no, I just messed up my positioning.
It's just nice not to be
See?
in catacombs.
So the outer bit heals. So yeah, you can see the animation went off onto this target dummy here, but it didn't damage the one behind it. Let's see if we can get a little bit closer. That might still damage it. But it's quite difficult in terms of like actually being, as you can see here, to the hitbox is there and you should be aware of it, but it's like if you miss it, it's just because you're unlucky, really. In a lot of the cases, because the window between damaging and only being able to heal an ally is quite small.
That
But it is
monster
there,
wants
so I'm
to
making
hear
you
me
aware of
scream.
it.
He can keep waiting.
Just trying to think if there's any other tips on Senna. I mean, this is a lot of information, obviously, in one video, and hopefully the timestamps have kind of condensed it down into more sizable chunks. It's something, a video that you might be able to revisit again more than one time to pick up the advanced tips, especially like later on. This is a support that has definitely got a lot of things going on for it. It's not an easy champion, as mentioned at the start. It is one of the hardest support champions that you can play. But if you do end up diving into Senna, it is a really good gateway into playing AD carry. Or if you are already an AD carry player, you should already have some of the mechanical instances in terms of doing the auto attack trades and being used to taking like minion aggro and things like that. That should come into play. And then when you're playing into like the late game, you're playing essentially like an AD carry would do anyway. You're still having to get down wards and things as a support and clearing out wards. But the fights are definitely going to be playing out a lot more kind of AD carry standard. A lot of it's going to be fighting for yourself. You're going to be wanting to do the correct trades, and positioning is going to be vital because you are going to be very, very squishy. But your damage is going to be very, very high in the late game. So you're going to be doing a lot of positioning stuff and auto attacking movement and stuff like that. Now, I did promise I would do a graph for you in terms of why crit builds isn't necessarily as good as Lethality after I've tested it out. Now, if we go over to Magical Paintland, we are going to do a little graph axis here. It doesn't have to be accurate. And time is going to be on the bottom, which means like length of the game. So like starting at 0 minutes and then getting into like 60 minutes, which never happens, but 60. And then this is power. So at the start of the game when you're playing Senna, regardless whether you're going Lethality or the crit builds, your power is going to be the same. You're going to be buying the same items, your runes are going to be pretty much the same. It's going to be Spectral Sickle. But what's going to happen is that because the game length and general is pretty low right now in League, by the time you get your items for crit, the game is already going to be nearly over, and it means that your power in the game isn't going to be where it could be if you went Lethality versus, you know, where the potential is. Like the potential of crit is massive. So if we do orange to represent crit power, so orange is crit, you know, you got a little bit of power there. You're picking up a couple of items and you're kind of hitting your 1 item power spike and then your 2, and then you're working with your souls as well, and like you're at 100% crit. Like the power is absurdly high, and it gets much higher as the game goes on, particularly around about past like the minute 25 to 30 minute mark. Like this power here is really good. It doesn't look like it on the graph, but this is really, really good power, like, you know, for a standard kind of like 2-ish item build for an AD carry. It's generally pretty good. This potential up here is OP. Like this is where like you will be 2-shotting 3 auto attacks, killing pretty much anyone, including AD carries. Senna can do that with that crit build at full build, very, very late into the game with an absurd amount of souls, like 160 souls, 180 souls. The thing is though, because game length is ending and also teams are getting tilted a lot more earlier on, like around this 15-minute mark, now that you can surrender with 4 people at 15 minutes, teams are more likely to give up in your games. So you want to be getting some sort of advantage earlier on, and just the power just creeps up higher and earlier on. So once you're around about like that 15 to 20 mark, you're hitting the same power spike with 2 items at 25 minutes. So you're getting your power spike around about 5 to 10 minutes earlier going Lethality build. The downside is though, is that the potential isn't quite as high. Now this is like not an obviously exact science graph. This is just me obviously doing something in Paint, but this is kind of what it looks like if you were to like actually, you know, get down the actual stats and show it in an actual game. So the end game potential with the full crit build is absolutely massive. The problem is it takes too much gold to get there. So you can get to this OP section sooner, so you can kind of shrink the bars in more on the width, depending on how much gold you can get. Like if you can get like 10 kills in lane, you should just go crit, because you're going to get into the OP status at like the 30-minute mark anyway, so it doesn't matter. But like in a traditional game of League where you maybe got like 1 or 2 kills in lane and you're coming out and stuff, you're doing like okay-ish on average, these bars are this graph is going to be relevant to you. So it's much better at the moment to go lethality, because, you know, here you're picking up the serrated dirt, which is going to give you lethality. And if you're going into crit build, you're going to probably end up having something like, I don't know, a noon quiver, which you don't really massively need, and it's like costs slightly more than a serrated dirt. So that's why the power isn't quite hitting that already from the very first kind of like item component. Also, the lethality build is cheaper. You're going Umbral Glaive first item. That's also going to give you more map dominance as well. So like that utility alone on the earlier one is also giving you a significant amount of power over like halfway completing or 2/3 of the way completing like a noon quiver or an affinity edge or a quick blades. Now the only reason why the Navori quick blades slash infinity edge has come in is because they reduced the amount of critical strike chance required in order for the item to actually work. It used to be 60% and they moved it down to 40%. So getting the souls on Senna, to get to that, you only need 40 souls, because you get 20% crit chance from having 40 souls. And the item Infinity Edge, for example, already has 20% crit chance on the item, and that facilitates the 40% crit chance requirement. So that's why people, including myself, were heavily testing Navori Quick Blades and Infinity Edge. Navori Quick Blades is generally quite a good item on Senna. It got slightly nerfed, unfortunately, recently at the start of the season. But it was a pretty fun build to go into, but it did massively require you to get ahead in lane and buy a decent chunk in order to be able to get to this OP status. Like, it's actually disgustingly OP if you are able to get the full kind of like 3 items really in order to get to OP status, because it means that you would need it would be like, say for example, Infinity Edge with a Kraken Slayer. Then you're probably going to want a Lord Dominique's to deal with tanks, because you don't have any armor penetration. Like the Lethality already has some armor penetration to deal with a couple of situations, but you would then need the Lord Dominique's to actually do damage to tanks, and tanks are quite, dominant right now, and that's really, really expensive. You're talking about, including boots, you're still going to want to go boots of swiftness. You're talking about like 10,000 gold, and honestly that's not really how much gold you're going to be getting in an average support game of League of Legends. Even when you're playing something like Senna, you're looking more around about the 8,000 gold mark, so you're making up for 2,000 gold that just doesn't exist. So this is why the lethality build is doing better right now, at least my hypotheses, and lethality does statistically have a higher win rate, so don't get mistaken into the crit build until things get changed. But hopefully that gives you a bit of in-depth analysis in terms of why lethality is better than crit, because the majority of the game anyway, you're going to be more powerful than the crit build, unless outside some gross outliner situations, if you get ridiculously far ahead in the laning phase. But I hope you liked my pretty graph and my pretty picture. This guide probably ended up being one of the longest, if not the longest, of the section, just because of how complicated Senna is and how many different mechanical things that are going on, and I wanted to try and cover everything. If you managed to watch it from start to finish, I hope I didn't overwhelm you. Please, bookmark this video if you are a new Senna player, and then revisit the advanced section, because I can guarantee you're going to forget some things, and some of those things are important, like picking up the souls of your Q and learning how to do the ward skill shots and things like that. So do revisit the advanced section after you've done a few games, just to kind of refresh your brain on some things as well. But I hope you liked this guide. I've been talking for over an hour now. I do apologize, but that's just the way some of these guides go. If you do have any questions, feel free to ask in the comment section underneath this video. If you are interested in looking at any other support guides, then there are many other support guides on the channel. Be sure to check that out and subscribe. Also, if you want to ask me any questions urgently, I am usually on my Discord, discord.gg/Bizzleberry. Make sure you verify your account with the verified channel. And I also stream on twitch.tv/Bizzleberry, where I've been playing League a lot recently, and also some other games, so you're more than welcome to ask me any League questions if I am playing something different. All the best, berries, take care, and see you soon for another support guide.